Hello there, and welcome to the Sleep Science Top 1. We are focusing on something well-known but incredibly seductive tonight. Most people know chocolate as simply a sweet treat, but are unaware of the remarkable journey behind it. This is a story that begins in tropical forests and ends in one of the most recognizable flavors on Earth. Time, weather, chemistry, and biology all influence chocolate. It carries the silent accuracy of craft, the impact of microbes, and the choices made by farmers. There is far more happening in chocolate than sweetness alone. Aroma, texture, and its ability to melt are guided by invisible structures and slow transformations. Everything can be changed with minor adjustments, including how it breaks and how long its flavor lasts. Across centuries, chocolate was integral to medicine, currency, ritual, comfort, and celebration. Even now, it continues to evolve as science and tradition meet in unexpected ways. If you love these pleasant trips, I ask you to like, subscribe, or share a thought below. It helps others find their way here too, one drowsy soul at a time. But for now, there's nothing you need to do but relax. Allow your body to soften. Let your breathing slow. As we delve into this intriguing tale together, allow your mind to become curious. Let's begin. The lineage of every bar begins in the damp shadows of the forest canopy, not as a sweet treat. If you ever held a cacao pod, you would not mistake it for candy. It has a thick shell that shields its contents, and it grows on a tree like a tiny, ridged melon. Splitting the husk uncovers a hidden, pale vault of potential of pulp and potential packed in pale, tangy pulp that tastes more like lychee than dessert. That surprise is the point. The chocolate part is not waiting fully formed. It has to be coaxed out through a chain of human choices, from harvest timing to careful drying. The seed is a living organism that is intended to sprout in its unprocessed state. The flavors we yearn for are a metamorphosis created through careful craftsmanship and plant chemistry. Every bar begins as a fruit you could carry in your hands. It is a material that yields at the exact threshold of human warmth, at the exact heat of a human touch, which is why it feels magical. The sensation is not just sweetness. Time is of the essence. As a firm piece warms on your tongue, it becomes fluid, and that quick change makes flavor bloom. When the fat melts, it releases aroma molecules that were trapped while the chocolate was solid. That is why smell seems to rise as the texture softens. In doing so, it invites you to change your very pace. You can let it dissolve rather than crunch for a long time, which makes the experience slower and more personal. This melting behavior is rare among foods we treat as candy. Many sweets stay hard, or they become sticky. Chocolate seems to disappear into warmth, and your mouth becomes part of the process. Even the sound can shift from a clean bite to a quiet fade. The magic is physics and chemistry, working at the scale of a single degree, turned into a feeling of comfort. Your brain links chocolate's aroma and fat with comfort, surprisingly fast. Flavor is not only on the tongue. Additionally, chocolate is designed to leave a lasting impression in memory. When warm fat carries aroma up into the nose, the brain treats that smell as part of the taste, and it stores the whole package as one experience. If chocolate shows up during rest, celebration, or relief after a hard day, those moments can become tied to the scent itself. Later, a whiff can bring back the feeling before a bite even happens. That is not weakness. It is a normal feature of how learning works in the brain. The pairing is especially strong when texture is smooth and melting, because the mouth reads that as safe and easy. Over time, chocolate can become a shortcut to a familiar emotional state, built from repeated small moments that your nervous system quietly catalogs. Chocolate flavor can shift by harvest season, like wine grapes do. Every season creates a slightly different draft of flavor for cacao trees. A wetter period can change how sugars develop in the pop. A drier stretch can concentrate certain compounds in the seed. Temperature swings can influence flowering and pod development, which affects how uniform a harvest becomes. The post-harvest work then reacts to those circumstances. It could take longer to dry. Heating may occur more quickly or more slowly during fermentation. Thus, each bar becomes a liquid map of a specific moment in time, can taste brighter, while the next harvest tastes deeper, even when the farm and maker stay the same. This is why serious chocolate makers track lots and seasons, and why some even print harvest information on packaging. This journey, in turn, reshapes how you perceive preferences. Instead of expecting sameness, you can listen for variation. Seasonal change is not a flaw. It indicates that chocolate is still related to a living crop, and living crops are never exactly the same. Even the same farm can taste different after a rainy month. Rain does not only water trees, it reshapes the entire chain from pod to bean. The length of time beans remain with their own acids and sugars can be altered by additional moisture, slowing, drying. Additionally, because cooler, wetter air draws heat away from the pile, it may be more difficult to control fermentation. Farmers might need to extend fermentation, adjust turning, or protect beans more carefully during drying to prevent unwanted off-notes. Even the pop can behave differently, since water content affects how quickly microbes move through sugars. After a rainy month, a farm's chocolate might taste brighter and more tangy, or it might taste softer and less intense, depending on how those conditions were handled. The intriguing thing is that this variation can occur without any genetic or geographical changes. The same trees can speak in a different voice, simply because the sky delivered a different rhythm. When you eat chocolate, you are not only tasting a place, you are tasting a particular month in that place. Many cacao farms rely on hand harvesting because pods ripen unevenly. A cacao tree does not behave like a machine that ripens everything at once. Pods on the same tree may be in different stages, and exposure to sunlight and variety can affect color change. That unevenness makes hand harvesting practical and often necessary. Workers choose pods that look ready, then leave the rest to mature. This selective approach protects flavor because ripeness affects the pulp that will drive fermentation later. It also protects the tree because harvesting requires precise cuts near sensitive areas where flowers emerge. Future production would be harmed by mechanized stripping. Hand harvesting is slow, and it is one reason cacao farming is labor-intensive. It is also intimate. The harvester becomes the quality control system, reading each pod like a signal. The rhythm of harvest becomes a series of careful choices, rather than a single event. When you unwrap chocolate, you are holding the result of countless individual decisions, made one pod at a time. The smell of chocolate can trigger craving before a bite happens. A chocolate craving frequently starts in the air. Your brain begins making predictions about what might happen as soon as you smell chocolate. It remembers rewards from the past and gets your body ready for them. Saliva can increase. Attention can narrow. Even before any sweetness reaches your tongue, you may experience a slight improvement in your mood. This is not a lack of determination. It is your nervous system doing its job, because smells are powerful signals. They arrive quickly and they connect strongly to memory and emotion. The aroma of chocolate is particularly potent because it frequently arises during times of solace, joy, or relief. Over time, those contexts become part of the scent itself. Because of this, even if you weren't hungry a moment ago, passing a bakery can feel like a magnet. The smell does not need permission. It walks straight into the brain's prediction system and starts writing the next scene. Cocoa butter, not sugar, is what gives chocolate its distinctive richness. Sugar can make chocolate sweet, but it cannot make it feel luxurious. That pleasure comes from fat, and cocoa butter is a very specific kind of fat. It coats your tongue in a thin, smooth layer that carries aroma upward into your nose, which is where much of flavor truly lands. It also softens edges. Bitterness can feel sharper when a food is dry. Add cocoa butter, and those same flavors feel rounder and deeper. This is why two bars with similar sweetness can feel completely different. One can seem chalky or thin. Another may have a lingering, full feeling. Cocoa butter also acts like a conductor for texture. It facilitates the chocolate's particles sliding past one another rather than scraping. When people say that chocolate is creamy, even in the absence of dairy, they are frequently referring to the silent work of cocoa butter. At room temperature, cocoa butter is solid, but it melts on your tongue. This is one of the reasons chocolate feels like it has perfect timing. In your hand, it can stay firm enough to break cleanly. In your mouth, it turns fluid quickly, and that shift changes how flavor arrives. Aroma compounds that were trapped in a solid matrix are released when cocoa butter melts, and as you breathe, the scents rise into the back of your nose. Texture also changes. Instead of resisting your teeth, the chocolate begins to glide, and the experience becomes more like a slow dissolve than a chew. That melt can also make sweetness feel stronger, because dissolved sugars spread across the tongue more evenly. Even with good ingredients, a bar that melts poorly can taste boring. The melt pattern of cocoa butter is an inherent characteristic of the cacao seed, and it coincidentally matches the warmth of the human mouth with remarkable accuracy. Do not mistake this for decay or the passage of time gone wrong. Chocolate bloom is the rise of fat crystals. A bloomed bar can look alarming. You might see pale streaks or a cloudy film, and it can resemble something that should be thrown away. It is not usually a safety concern, it is a structure issue. Cocoa butter may re-solidify on the surface in a different crystal arrangement after migrating over time. That new surface scatters light, which makes the chocolate look grey or dusty. The texture can change too. The snap may feel weaker, and the melt can seem less graceful. Bloom often happens when chocolate experiences repeated temperature swings, like moving from a warm room to a cool one and back again. It can also happen if the chocolate was not set in a stable crystal structure to begin with. The key point is reassuring. Bloom is usually chocolate aging out loud, not chocolate going bad. When the air grows heavy, the sugar rises to the surface like a fine, white frost. Dissolves sugar, then dries rough. This kind of bloom feels different. The surface may feel sandy or gritty rather than smooth, and it frequently develops after condensation. Picture a cold bar taken from the refrigerator into warm air. A thin layer of water may accumulate on the surface. That moisture dissolves some of the sugar, and when the water evaporates, the sugar is left behind in tiny crystals. The texture clue is the telltale sign. Even though those crystals scatter light and produce a pale haze, it feels rough, not waxy. The flavor can seem oddly sharper too, because sugar crystals hit the tongue in concentrated spots. Shiver bloom does not mean the chocolate is moldy. It means the chocolate got wet and then dried. The remedy lies not in the recipe, but in the sanctuary of your storage. Improved storage with a constant temperature and low humidity is the solution, preventing water from ever changing the surface. Chocolate carries tiny amounts of caffeine, usually much less than coffee. After eating chocolate, people occasionally experience a slight boost and believe it must be high in caffeine. In actuality, chocolate typically contains very small amounts, which vary depending on how much cocoa is used in the recipe. Because caffeine is found in the cocoa solids, darker chocolate typically contains more caffeine than milk chocolate. Even then, the typical effect is gentle compared with a cup of coffee. That can make chocolate feel like a softer companion to late afternoons, rather than a sharp jolt. It can also be misleading, because chocolate's pleasure can feel energizing even when caffeine is minimal. Taste, aroma, and expectation can all create a sense of perkiness that is not purely chemical. The practical takeaway is simple. The cocoa percentage is more important than the bar's size alone if caffeine is an issue. Chocolate can contain caffeine, but it rarely behaves like coffee. Chocolate's quiet pulse is driven by theobromine, a gentle, enduring companion, gentler but longer lasting. Chocolate's most distinctive stimulant is not caffeine, It is theobromine, a compound that belongs to the same chemical family but tends to feel smoother in the body. Instead of describing it as a sudden spike, people frequently describe it as a steady lift. That matters for how chocolate feels, because the experience can unfold slowly. You taste, you melt, you breathe, and then the subtle stimulation lingers in the background. Theobromine can also contribute to chocolate's bitterness, although it is not the only source of that taste. Its presence is part of why a rich, dark bar can feel satisfying in a different way than a sugary candy. A dose component is also present. The more cocoa solids in the chocolate, the more likely you are to notice theobromine's effect. It is not a dramatic buzz for most people. It is more like a quiet brightness that hangs around after the last bite. Why a human's joy becomes a dog's silent peril. This mismatch exists because not properly processed theobromine. Chocolate is a well-known example of how something that appeals to people can be harmful to dogs. Theobromine can accumulate in dog systems because they break it down far more slowly than humans do. The size of the dog, the kind of chocolate, and the quantity consumed all affect the risk. Dark chocolate and baking chocolate tend to be far more concentrated than milk chocolate, which is why a small amount can matter. This is not about chocolate being poison in a dramatic sense. It is about a mismatch in metabolism. Signs of trouble can include restlessness, vomiting, rapid heartbeat, and more serious symptoms in severe cases. The safest rule is simple and strict. Even if a dog begs and seems fine afterward, you should never give them chocolate. When a dog consumes chocolate, it's important to get in touch with a veterinarian or poison helpline as soon as possible, because timing can affect the outcome. A pinch of salt can sharpen sweetness without making chocolate taste salty. Salt is not only a seasoning, it is a signal booster. In small amounts, it can reduce the perception of bitterness and make sweetness feel clearer, which is why a tiny pinch can make chocolate seem more chocolatey. It also helps draw attention to aroma, because the brain tends to experience flavors as more vivid when balance improves. This is why salted chocolate does not have to taste like a snack food. It can taste smoother, rounder, and more focused. There is a craft element too. The type of salt changes the experience. The fine salt quickly dissolves and vanishes into the melt. Flaky salt can create little bursts of contrast that wake up the tongue. Either approach can be beautiful when used carefully. The key is temperance. Too much salt crowds out delicate notes and turns the whole bar into a single loud idea. With the right touch, salt acts like a spotlight, not a takeover. Cacao and chili go well together, reflecting long-standing culinary customs. Chocolate and chili can feel like opposites, but they share a common talent. Warmth that travels through the mouth and chest can be carried by both. When they meet, the heat of chili can make chocolate's roasted notes feel deeper, while the richness of cocoa can soften chili's sharp edges. The end product is more than just hot chocolate. It is a layered sensation, where sweetness arrives first, then warmth follows, then aroma rises again as you breathe out. The pairing also has history, which gives it emotional weight. Cacao was frequently eaten in strong, savory dishes that welcomed spice long before chocolate became a candy bar. Modern versions sometimes lean on chili as a gimmick. The best versions treat it as choreography. You want the heat to arrive late, like a slow closing door, so the cocoa has time to speak. When it is done well, chili does not cover chocolate. It reveals a different side of it. Even in very small amounts, vanilla can enhance the sweetness of chocolate. Vanilla is powerful because it works like a translator between flavors. A trace can make sweetness feel warmer and more rounded, even when the sugar level stays the same. It can also soften harsh edges, so cocoa tastes smoother without losing depth. For this reason, some chocolatiers use vanilla very carefully. Too much, and it becomes the main voice, turning different bars into the same familiar profile. Just enough, and it acts like a frame around a painting, helping you notice what is already there. Vanilla can also influence aroma perception. It adds a reassuring connection that many people picked up from baked goods and desserts at a young age. That memory effect can make chocolate feel richer and more satisfying than the ingredient list would predict. The trick's ability to be imperceptible is what makes it so fascinating. It may surprise you to learn that this tastes like vanilla. This tastes better, you might think. That's vanilla working quietly. The flame coaxes out the memories of sun-drenched berries and toasted earth, honey, nuts, or tobacco notes. You might be surprised by the destination when you use chocolate as a flavor travel ticket. One bar might open with a bright tang that feels like red fruit. Another might drift toward honeyed warmth. Another might have a darker, drier note that people describe as tobacco-like, or it might lean toward toasted nuts. These are not added flavors in many well-made bars. Aroma compounds interact with your brain's memory of previous scents to create these perceptions. That is why tasting chocolate is partly sensory and partly personal. Two people can agree it is delicious, then describe it differently. The best way to catch these notes is to slow down. Let the piece melt and breathe out through your nose as it warms. Notice what appears at the start, in the middle, and in the finish. Chocolate is not only sweet and bitter, it can change while you are still tasting it, and it can be vibrant, almost like fruit. The wonder includes that movement. Snap, shine, and melt are all determined by a tiny alteration in cocoa butter crystals. Chocolate can be made from the same ingredients and still behave like two different worlds. The difference often comes down to how the fat solidifies. Cocoa butter can set into several crystal arrangements, and each one has its own personality. One kind breaks cleanly and has a glossy appearance. Another looks dull and soft, and it can crumble instead of snapping. The trick is that these forms are not chosen by labels or wishes. Temperature history serves as their guide. Warm it too much, and you erase the structure. Cool it the wrong way, and you encourage unstable forms. Tempering is the art of steering the chocolate toward the crystal that gives the satisfying finish, the crisp sound, and the smooth melt. This is why a chocolatier can care about a few degrees, like a musician cares about tuning. A tiny shift can change the entire bite. Cacao trees can only grow where the air stays warm year-round. World history is shaped by the pickiness of cocoa. It thrives close to the equator, in places where temperatures stay steady and the air holds moisture for much of the year. Too much cold can stall growth. Too much heat can stress the tree. Even wind can be a problem, because cacao evolved under forest canopies, where the air moves softly and sunlight arrives in filtered patches. Cacao maps appear as a band around the world because of that limited comfort zone. It also means chocolate depends on specific landscapes and communities, not just on factories. A change in rainfall timing can shift flowering. A longer dry season can shrink pod size. When you taste chocolate, you are tasting a crop that is both valuable and vulnerable because it lives within tight boundaries. Every cacao pod contains seeds that need to ferment in order to taste chocolatey. Fresh cacao seeds hold a secret, one that defies our modern expectations. If you bite one straight from the pod, it is bitter and astringent, more like a plant defending itself than a dessert ingredient. The first step toward chocolate is a deliberate pause in the life of the seed. Beneath blankets of banana leaves, a hidden fever begins to rise. Cover them and let time do its work. Heat builds from within, and the seed's internal chemistry starts to shift. That shift matters because it lays the groundwork for what roasting can later reveal. Without this stage, chocolate can taste thin, sharp, and oddly flat, even if the beans look fine from the outside. The fruit you see may be the pod, but once it is opened, the hidden labor starts in warm piles that smell alive, sour, and sweet. Fermentation creates hundreds of flavor chemicals before any roasting happens. It may seem unbelievable that the future scent of chocolate is already being created by a warm pile of fruit and seeds. Yet this is where complexity starts. Microbes feed on the sugary pulp and release a cascade of new molecules. Later on, some will have a floral scent, some prefer caramel, nuts, or dried fruit. As the temperature rises and the acidity changes, the seed reacts internally. By the time the beans are dried, they already carry the blueprint of their eventual character. Roasting does not invent those notes from nothing. It develops what this earlier stage set in motion. That is why two farms can roast the same way and still produce wildly different results. Part of the difference is the invisible community doing chemistry in the dark, long before a bean ever reaches a roaster. The majority of cacao pollination is done by tiny midges rather than bees. Small and complex, cacao flowers are not designed to withstand the heavy traffic of large pollinators. Instead, cacao often depends on midges, tiny flies that thrive in damp leaf litter and shaded spaces. Because of their small size, they can be redirected by a slight breeze, which contributes to the story's element of randomness. Because pollination is delicate, many flowers will never develop into pods, even in a healthy grove. This gives cacao farming an almost surprising dependency on the forest floor. Midge populations may decline if the ground dries out, or if the habitat gets too clean and exposed. Some growers encourage the right conditions by protecting shade, maintaining moisture, and leaving organic material where these insects breed. In a way, a chocolate bar begins with a nearly invisible flight, happening at the scale of crumbs and dew. Ancient Mesoamericans drank cacao as a bitter, frothy, spiced beverage. For many early cacao drinkers, sweetness was not the point. The drink could be strong, earthy, and sharp, then lifted with spices that warmed the throat and sharpened the senses. What made it famous was often the foam. People learned that pouring the liquid from height, again and again, could raise a thick froth that felt luxurious on the lips. It wasn't decoration, that foam. It changed texture and aroma, and it turned a simple drink into an experience worth ceremony. Cacao could also carry social meaning, offered in gatherings where food was never only about hunger. When chocolate later became a solid bar, it carried echoes of that older world, where cacao was closer to a ritual than a snack. The next time you smell chocolate before you taste it, imagine a cup first, not a wrapper. Cacao beans were once used as money, traded like everyday coins. A good currency has to be countable, portable, and hard to fake. And cacao beans fit the role in a surprisingly practical way. They could be measured by the handful. They were small enough to carry. People wanted them for food and drink, so their value was obvious. That meant cacao could move through markets as a tool for trade, not only as an ingredient. It defies contemporary expectations, which makes it an odd idea. Today, we treat chocolate as a reward after real life. In those older systems, cacao was part of real life itself. Sitting beside tools, textiles, and daily necessities, using food as money also reveals how precious cacao was. If something requires land, labor, and careful handling to produce, you do not spend it carelessly. In every bean, there was both taste and purchasing power, held in the same small brown shell. Cacao flowers are so small, many bloom right on the trunk. If you walk through a cacao grove at the right moment, the tree can look sprinkled with tiny stars. The blossoms are delicate, waxy, and only about the size of a fingernail. Many appear straight from the trunk and older branches, as if the tree is decorating its own bark. Poor placement makes sense. Later on, the tree won't have to rely on thin twigs that could break under the weight of the heavy pods. It also turns the trunk into a busy corridor for insects that creep and flutter close to the surface. Additionally, the timing is short. A flower can be ready for pollination for only a short window, and then it moves on. Cacao feels almost secretive because of this. It does not shout with big petals. Near the wood, it silently performs its most crucial function. Most cacao blossoms never become pods, even in healthy orchards. A cacao tree can produce thousands of flowers and still deliver only a modest number of pods. That sounds wasteful until you realize what a pod demands. It is a heavy, slow-growing package of seeds and pulp that will hang for months, drawing energy from the tree the entire time. The plant is wary. It opens opportunities, then commits only when conditions seem right, because the flower's structure is complex and its success is brittle. Pollination is one filter, weather is another filter, because too much rain can interrupt pollen transfer and too little moisture can stress the tree. Even after a flower is fertilized, the young pod can be dropped if resources tighten. This is viewed by farmers as a suspenseful tale. A branch can promise abundance one week, then quietly thin its own future the next. Chocolate begins with that uncertainty long before any harvest basket fills. A cacao pod can ripen for months, hanging like a living lantern. After pollination, cacao does not hurry. The pod swells slowly, shifting color as it matures. Some varieties move from green to yellow, others deepen toward orange or red. Growers learn to read these changes with the care of someone checking fruit on a single tree, not a whole aisle of produce. Ripeness matters because it sets the balance of sugars in the pulp and the readiness of the seeds inside. Pick too early, and the flavors can struggle later. If you pick too late, rot and pests will have more opportunities. This is why harvest is often done by hand, pod by pod, with a blade that avoids cutting the tree's cushions where new flowers will emerge. One pod is not a fast prize. It is a long investment, dangling in plain sight. Inside each pod, sweet white pulp feeds the microbes of fermentation. The pulp, not the seed, is what you taste first when you open a pod. Bright and fruity, it adheres to each bean like a velvety jelly. That pulp is more than a snack. It is fuel. The sugars and moisture in the piled beans provide the ideal environment for microbial activity. Farmers use straightforward, effective decisions to manage this. They may use banana leaves to keep the mass warm and covered, or wooden boxes that store heat. They turn the beans at certain moments to bring in oxygen and keep the process moving. Because too much liquid can drown the pile and slow the change, even the drainage is important. The pulp is the spark that consistently ignites fermentation. Without it, the beans would dry as plain seeds. With it, they enter a transformation that can be guided but never fully controlled. Yeasts start fermentation first, making alcohol long before acidity rises. At the beginning, the pile smells surprisingly like fruit. Yeasts move in fast because they love sugar and low oxygen. They feast on the pulp and release alcohol and heat, and the temperature of the mass begins to climb. This early stage is fleeting, but it sets the pace. If the pile stays too cool, the next steps may never fully develop. If it heats unevenly, some beans can lag behind, while others surge ahead. Expert fermenters focus on sensory cues rather than just instruments. They notice when the aroma shifts from fresh fruit towards something deeper and warmer. They listen for the change in sound when beans are moved and liquid drains away. This is the moment when cacao starts acting less like produce and more like a living workshop. The alcohol is not the destination, it is the opening act that makes the rest possible. Bacteria then turn alcohol into acids, reshaping flavor and safety. Once oxygen enters the fermenting mass, a new caste takes over. Bacteria that thrive in airy, warm conditions begin converting alcohol into acids. That shift changes everything. The rising acidity helps break down the bean's internal structure, and it pushes biochemical reactions that prepare flavor precursors for later roasting. It also discourages some unwanted microbes that could spoil the batch. The smell changes again, becoming sharper and more pungent, and the beans themselves begin to look different. Their color moves away from a raw, pale tone toward deeper browns as the seed's living systems shut down. That matters because a bean that stays alive behaves like a seed, not like an ingredient. This stage is one reason fermentation is so carefully timed. The flavor may be thin if there is insufficient acid development. The finished chocolate may taste harsh if there is too much. The best batches find a narrow middle path. Poor fermentation can flatten chocolate, even if the beans look perfect. Many beans look fine from the outside. The real truth is often hidden inside, and makers have a way to check it. They do a simple cut test, slicing beans open to examine color and texture. A pleasing variety of browns and a structure that indicates the chemistry of the seed has changed are characteristics of well-fermented beans. Under-fermented beans can look slaty or gray, and they often carry a stubborn bitterness that roasting cannot magically erase. Over-fermented beans can pick up funky notes that crowd out more delicate aromas. This is why chocolate quality is not only about origin or variety, it is about process discipline. Improved airflow may be necessary at the fermentation site. Turning might need different timing. Even the thickness of the pile matters, because it controls heat. A buyer can pay premium prices for beautiful-looking sacks, then discover the flavor has no lift. The error was cast long before, in the unseen quiet of the fermenting pile, the invisible stage. The flame coaxes out the memories of sun-drenched berries and toasted earth, and unlocks deep, knotty notes. Cacao becomes aromatic during roasting. You can smell it from across the room. Heat pushes out some of the sharper acids formed during fermentation and drying, and it also sets off browning reactions that build warmer, toastier flavors. There isn't just one setting that works for all beans. Bright, fruity tones can be preserved with a lighter roast. A deeper roast can emphasize cocoa richness and roasted nut character. Instead of forcing everything into one flavor, the art lies in matching the roast to what the beans already contain. Roasters keep an eye out for variations in color, sound, and aroma. They cool beans quickly to stop the reactions at the right moment. Done well, roasting does not cover the bean's story, it reveals it. Done poorly, it can scorch away nuance, leaving only bitterness. This step is why chocolate can taste elegant in one bar and blunt in another, even with similar ingredients. Simply put, cocoa nibs are fragrant pieces of roasted beans. After roasting, beans still wear a papery shell that you do not want in a silky bar. Cracked beans are separated from their husks during the next stage, winnowing. What remains are nibs, small shards that smell intensely of cacao and toast. They are a crossroads ingredient. You can grind them into chocolate, or you can use them as a crunchy garnish on desserts, oatmeal, or yogurt. Some even steep nibs, like tea, to create an unsweetened, brownie-scented cocoa infusion. Additionally, nibs can quickly reveal quality. A good nib tastes clean and complex, and it leaves a pleasant finish. A flawed nib can taste smoky, overly sour, or hollow. In this sense, nibs represent the sincere midpoint of the chocolate-making process. They are close enough to the source to show what the bean really is, and refined enough to be enjoyed on their own. Grinding nibs makes cocoa liquor, a paste that flows with heat. When nibs are ground, something surprising happens. They stop behaving like dry crumbs and begin to flow like a thick liquid. This is due to the fact that cocoa butter is released during grinding, and heat is added by friction until the mixture turns into a smooth paste known as cocoa liquor. It is not alcoholic. It's just fluffy cacao. Texture engineering starts at this point. The paste can be refined, so particles become tiny enough to feel velvety instead of gritty. The way it flows matters too, because it determines how easily chocolate can be molded into bars or coated onto candies. Makers can adjust the process to keep certain aromas bright, or to build deeper roasted notes. You can think of cocoa liquor as the moment cacao becomes programmable. The bean story is still there, but now it can be shaped into many textures and styles. It is the bridge between agriculture and the final snap. The most stable cocoa butter crystal makes chocolate glossy and crisp. Not all solid chocolate is solid in the same way. Cocoa butter can organize itself into different crystal patterns, and only one of them gives the classic finish people recognize. The bar appears polished even before you taste it, when that stable form predominates because the surface reflects cleanly. Additionally, the texture varies. It doesn't crumble into dusty pieces and breaks with a confident, clean bite. It also melts in a more orderly way, so the mouthfeel feels smooth instead of waxy. The tiny difference is what's fascinating. The ingredients do not need to change. The storage does not need to change. The only change can be how the chocolate cooled and reset after melting. Whether a bar appears like a gem or like a smudged stone is determined by that invisible architecture. Tempering is controlled crystallization, not a mysterious chef's ritual. Although it appears to be a performance, it is actually a plan. Chocolate is guided through a temperature journey so the right crystals form in the right proportion. Some chocolatiers spread it across a cool slab and work it with scrapers, watching how it thickens and shines. Others use machines that warm, cool, and rewarm with steady precision. The objective is the same in either case. You create a small population of desirable crystals, then encourage them to multiply, while the rest are discouraged. When done correctly, the chocolate sets with a polished appearance and behaves predictably in molds and coatings. When it is rushed, the surface can look dull or streaked, and the texture can feel soft in the wrong places. Tempering is not a miracle. It is the art of steering a material that remembers its thermal past. Conching can take hours or days, smoothing texture and rounding flavor. Conching, which is essentially controlled rubbing for an extended period of time, is one of the most peculiar food preparation processes. Chocolate is kept warm, while paddles or rollers push and fold it over and over until it changes character. The texture improvement is easy to imagine. Tiny particles get coated more evenly in fat, so the mixture begins to feel silky instead of powdery. Manufacturers are fixated on the duration because the flavor shift is more subtle. Early on, chocolate can taste tight and aggressive. With time, those edges soften. The taste becomes more cohesive, like an orchestra that has finally started playing together. The process also changes how the chocolate flows, which matters for molding and enrubing. Some makers stop conching early to keep bold, rustic notes. Others go longer for a smoother, quieter profile. The same batch can become different personalities simply by time and motion. Harsh volatiles are released during conching, softening the scent. Some aromas are wonderful at low levels and exhausting at high levels. After fermentation and roasting, chocolate can carry sharp, volatile compounds that smell too vinegary or too smoky. Conching gives them an exit. The chocolate is held warm and moving, which increases the chance that those like molecules will evaporate into the air. Makers sometimes ventilate the space or adjust airflow, because conching is partly about letting the chocolate breathe. What remains can feel more balanced. Fruity notes start to stand out. The abrasiveness of roasty notes decreases. It's possible for sweetness to appear cleaner, because fewer sharp aromas are fighting for attention. Because of this, a chocolate that initially tastes rough can become sophisticated without the need for additional ingredients. The transformation is subtraction, not decoration. It is the slow removal of distractions. Conching is similar to lens polishing. You are not painting a new picture. In order to finally see the picture, you are removing the haze. Dark chocolate can contain only cocoa solids, cocoa butter, and sugar. That simplicity is part of its appeal. With just those components, the bar becomes a direct conversation between cacao character and sweetness level. Deep flavor and color are added by cocoa solids. Cocoa butter brings texture and melt. Sugar sets the balance, and it can either highlight subtle notes or cover them. This is why ingredient lists matter. A short list often means the maker is asking you to taste the bean itself, not a long recipe. It also means percentages can be meaningful, because the bar has fewer places to hide. A high cocoa percentage can be intense, but intensity is not the same as quality. If the cacao is aromatic and well handled, even a lower percentage can taste complex. More cocoa can amplify the harshness of the cocoa. Dark chocolate at its best is minimal, and that minimalism leaves nowhere for craft to cheat. Milk chocolate adds milk solids, which mellow bitterness and add caramel notes. Chocolate is instantly altered by milk. Bitterness often softens because milk proteins can bind with some of the cacao compounds that taste sharp, and the overall impression becomes rounder. Milk also brings its own sweetness, not only from added sugar, but from lactose, which has a gentler taste. Then there is the toasty character. Milk powders can develop warm, cooked notes during processing, and those notes blend with cacao's roasted tones in a way that many people describe as caramel-like. Texture shifts, too. Milk chocolate can feel plush and creamy, even at cooler temperatures, because the whole mixture is less stark. This is why milk chocolate is often a first love. It is approachable, but it can still be sophisticated when the cacao is expressive and the recipe is well tuned. A great milk chocolate does not hide cacao. It reframes it with warmth. White chocolate contains cocoa butter, but no cocoa solids at all. That single omission changes everything you taste. The deep brown flavors associated with chocolate are lost when cocoa solids are absent, leaving only the creamy fat from the cacao seed. That fat is naturally aromatic, but it is subtle. It can smell like warm dairy, even when there is no milk, and it can carry notes that feel like honey or toasted nuts, depending on how it is handled. Because the flavor is quieter, every added ingredient becomes louder. Vanilla can dominate. Sugar can turn a cloying. It can be changed with even a tiny pinch of salt. White chocolate is also a texture showcase. When it is made well, it melts cleanly and leaves no waxy drag. When it is made poorly, it can taste flat and sugary. It is more of a cocoa butter spotlight than a cocoa showcase, which is surprising in and of itself. After most of the fat is pressed out, what's left is cocoa powder. Imagine reducing the volume of the richness of chocolate while increasing the aroma. That is the role of cocoa powder. It begins as a thick cocoa paste, and then pressure forces much of the cocoa butter away. What is left becomes a dry cake that can be milled into fine powder. This changes how it behaves in your kitchen. Cocoa powder disperses into liquids without bringing much fat, so it can build deep flavor without making a recipe greasy. Additionally, because there is less cocoa butter to soften edges, bitterness is more noticeable. That is why cocoa powder can taste intense even when it is not sweet. In baking, it can color a cake almost black and perfume a room with a smell that feels like dessert before the first bite. It is the essence of chocolate, made by separation and force, but lighter and more adaptable. Dutch processing makes cocoa less acidic and darkens its color. Certain cocoa powders have a sharp, bright flavor. Others taste smoother and darker, and that difference often comes from one choice. Dutch processing treats cocoa with an alkaline solution, which reduces acidity and shifts flavor. The color of the powder can deepen to a richer brown and become more mellow. It's not just a cosmetic alteration. It affects how cocoa behaves in recipes, especially where acidity matters for leavening. Additionally, it can alter our perception of chocolate itself, because even when sweetness remains constant, we tend to associate darker hues with deeper flavors. Dutch cocoa is used in many traditional baked goods to give them that recognizable, rounded chocolate flavor. It is a reminder that chocolate is not a single flavor locked in nature. It is a material that can be tuned. One processing step can move it from zippy and bright to smooth and almost smoky before it ever meets sugar. Natural cocoa stays brighter in flavor, often tasting fruitier. When cocoa is not alkalized, it keeps more of its natural acidity, and that can make it feel lively. Instead of a heavy, dark profile, it can lean toward tanny notes that hint at berries or citrus. Those who believe that chocolate should only taste like roast and caramel may be surprised by this. Natural cocoa can also taste more direct, like you are closer to the bean's original personality. In recipes, that brightness can make chocolate desserts feel less muddy and more defined. It can lift the taste of banana bread, sharpen the edge of brownies, or make a chocolate cake feel lighter on the palate. It also interacts differently with baking soda and baking powder, which is why swapping cocoa types can change, rise, and texture. Natural cocoa is a good reminder that chocolate flavor has a spectrum. Some versions rumble like thunder, others sparkle a little, and they do it without any added flavoring. Chocolate's bitterness comes from polyphenols, not from theobromine alone. People often blame theobromine for bitterness because it is famous. But the taste you call bitter is usually a chorus, not a solo. One of the loudest parts of that chorus is polyphenols. They are plant compounds that can taste astringent and sharp, especially when cocoa is minimally sweetened. They also contribute to that drying sensation some dark chocolates leave behind. This is intriguing because of how adaptable the result can be. Fermentation, drying, and roasting all shape polyphenol levels and how harsh they feel. Even sugar is not just a sweet mask. It changes how your tongue interprets bitterness. Because of this, two dark bars with comparable percentages may appear very different. One can taste elegant and balanced. Another may seem difficult. Bitterness is not a single ingredient's fault. It is the outcome of how a plant protects itself and how people decide to turn that protection into enjoyment. Some cacao varieties taste naturally floral without added flavors. It can feel like magic when a chocolate bar tastes faintly like jasmine or orange blossom. And then you realize nobody added flowers. These scents, which are influenced by genetics and meticulous post-harvest care, may originate from the bean itself. In some varieties, the underlying chemistry leans toward compounds that our brains interpret as floral. If fermentation is clean and well-timed, those delicate notes survive. They may disappear into a cloud of toast if roasting is done excessively. That is why makers who chase floral profiles often roast with restraint, and they avoid overpowering additions. Tasting a floral cacao can feel like listening closely. The notes often appear in the middle of the melt, then drift away into a sweet finish. It serves as a reminder that chocolate comes in a variety of flavors, with varying amounts of sugar. It can be as aromatic and nuanced as fruit, tea, or perfume, and it can achieve that on its own. Others, influenced by soil and fermentation, have a strong, earthy flavor. Some chocolates do not whisper. They arrive with the weight of dark bread crust, damp wood, roasted nuts, and deep cocoa. Those bold profiles can be shaped by the minerals and organic matter in the soil because the tree draws its building blocks from the ground. They are also shaped by fermentation choices that push the flavor toward heavier tones. Longer fermentation, warmer piles, or different turning rhythms can favor deeper, more robust compounds. When someone describes a chocolate's flavor as earthy, they usually mean that it has a sense of grounding and gravity. It can pair beautifully with coffee, red wine, or smoky teas because it holds its own. These chocolates can also be more forgiving in baking, since their strong base survives heat and sugar. The most intriguing part is that earthy is not a defect when it is clean. Like a bold roast, it's a style. It tells you the bean story took a darker path, and it did it with intention. Chocolate from a single origin may represent the climate and microbes of a particular area. When chocolate is labeled from a single origin, it is often an invitation to taste place. Cocoa does not ferment in a sterile lab. Local bacteria and yeasts land on the pulp and multiply during the outdoor fermentation process. Those microbes can differ from valley to valley, and they can push flavor in distinct directions. Climate is also important. Humidity changes drying speed. Rainfall patterns change, harvest timing. Even nighttime temperatures can affect how quickly fermentation heats and cools. Put those together, and you can get a chocolate that tastes unmistakably like its home, even when the recipe stays simple. That is why some bars carry surprising notes, like tropical fruit brightness, spicy warmth, or a nutty depth. That feels familiar. It is not marketing alone, it is agriculture, meeting microbiology, then bottled into a bar. By itself, single origin does not guarantee quality. It promises specificity, And when the craft is done carefully, specificity can be exciting. Because cacao is so sensitive to pests, farming is an ongoing struggle. Cacao trees live in a world where a tiny bite can have outsized consequences. Fungi can infiltrate wounds, insects can pierce pods, and a minor issue can spread throughout an orchard more quickly than you might think. In the same way that a gardener inspects roses, farmers frequently walk their trees to look for early warning signs before problems worsen. If a pod is damaged, it can become a doorway for rot, and that can ruin seeds that took months to develop. Because damp, still air can encourage outbreaks, some growers prune to increase airflow. Others remove infected pods quickly, even when it hurts to discard them, because leaving one sick pod can risk many healthy ones. As a result, choker depends on alertness rather than just sunshine. Each harvest reflects countless small decisions made under pressure, and that tension is part of why cacao feels precious. Many cacao trees are grown under shade, copying the forest canopy. Cacao did not evolve as a lone tree standing in full blazing sun. It began as an understory plant, used to dappled light and a calmer microclimate. By simulating that protective ceiling, shade trees can lessen heat, stress, and abrupt temperature fluctuations. They also slow the drying of soil, which can matter in regions where rain arrives in bursts rather than steady patterns. Cacao leaves in a shaded grove frequently appear healthier on hot afternoons, and even a short distance away can make the air feel cooler. Shade management is also a balancing act. Reduced flowering and yield can result from excessive shade. Too little can expose the trees to scorch and strain. Farmers choose species that fit their land, sometimes planting fruit or timber trees that add extra income. When shade is done well, the farm begins to resemble a managed forest, and chocolate becomes a crop grown with architecture, not just agriculture. Shade-grown cacao can protect wildlife when managed thoughtfully. There is more to a cacao farm than just rows of trees. With diverse shade and careful ground cover, it can become a corridor for birds, insects, and small mammals that need connected habitat. Because the layered vegetation provides food and shelter, you may see more butterflies and hear more songbirds. Predatory insects can also benefit, and they may help reduce certain pest pressures naturally. The key is that shade-grown is not an automatic promise. It depends on how the farm is designed and maintained. A single shade species planted like a uniform ceiling is different from a mixed canopy with flowering trees, leaf litter, and varied heights. By minimizing erosion and reducing runoff, conscientious farms can also safeguard waterways. Cacao is not a standalone crop in that type of system. It is a participant in a living landscape, and the chocolate it produces is tied to more than human appetite. Cacao genetics are surprisingly diverse, yet commercial supply is often narrow. In the wild and in traditional growing regions, cacao shows a wide range of forms and flavors. Some trees produce pods with thick shells. Others have pods with different colors, shapes, and seed counts. That genetic variety can influence aroma, disease resistance, and how a tree handles drought or heat. However, the global market frequently depends on a smaller number of widely planted varieties, in part because it is simpler to finance and forecast consistent yield. This creates a quiet risk. When many farms depend on similar genetics, a new disease or a shifting climate can hit harder because fewer trees carry natural resistance. It also narrows the flavor palette available to chocolate makers. Using and conserving a variety of cacao is similar to maintaining an open library. Each variety is a different book, and some books contain traits we may need urgently in the future. Genetics might sound distant from your dessert. Cacao has the power to determine what kind of chocolate will be available in a generation. Rare and highly valued, Criollo cacao is frequently softer and less bitter. Criollo is famous in chocolate circles because it can produce a softer profile with less harshness when it is well handled. It is also known for being harder to grow in many settings, which contributes to its rarity. For a farmer, rarity is not romance. In a livelihood already influenced by weather and pests, it may result in decreased yield, increased vulnerability, and increased risk. For a chocolate maker, it can mean a chance to craft a bar that feels refined, where subtle notes can show themselves without being pushed into the background by bitterness. When someone says that a chocolate made with criollo is elegant, they usually mean that the flavors come through more smoothly. That does not guarantee greatness. Post-harvest care still matters, and poor handling can waste even an excellent bean. But when conditions align, criollo can feel like a quiet conversation rather than a loud performance. And that is why it is sought after. Global production is dominated by Forastero cacao, which is prized for its yield and hardiness. It is no coincidence that the majority of chocolate produced worldwide is based on Forastero. Farmers frequently depend on trees that can withstand harsher conditions and produce consistently. Forastero types are widely used because they tend to be robust and they can deliver the volumes that large supply chains demand. Candy bars and baking cocoa are examples of everyday chocolate that have been shaped by this practical strength. Yet dominance does not mean dullness. With careful fermentation and roasting, Forastero can carry pleasing complexity, including deep cocoa richness and satisfying roasted notes. The difference is that its strengths often show up as structure and intensity rather than delicate perfume. Similar to how a steady drumbeat supports a melody, Forastero provides the framework for more aromatic beans in some blends. When considering chocolate as a food that is consumed all over the world, Forastero is the main factor that allowed chocolate to become commonplace rather than uncommon. Initially, Trinitario cacao was a hybrid that combined aroma and durability. Trinitario is often described as a bridge between worlds. It emerged from a mix of cacao lineages, and growers valued it because it could combine sturdier growth with appealing flavor potential. That balance matters because farmers need trees that survive, and makers want beans that sing. In a good Trinitario chocolate, you can find a pleasing middle ground. While brighter notes continue to emerge during the melt, the cocoa base can be quite potent. It is also a reminder that cacao is not frozen in time. People have been shaping these trees through selection and planting choices for generations, responding to storms, disease pressures, and market demand. A hybrid is more than just a scientific idea. It is a human answer to a problem, created in orchards rather than laboratories. When you taste a chocolate that feels both sturdy and expressive, you may be tasting that history of adaptation, built into the tree's genetics and carried through craft. Cacao diseases can erase harvests, pushing farmers to abandon orchards. A cacao orchard is not a quick crop. Trees take years to become productive, and farmers invest time, pruning, and care long before the first meaningful harvest. Disease can be so devastating because of this. A serious outbreak can wipe out pods, weaken trees, and drain the hope that next season will recover. When losses repeat, families may have to make painful choices. They may migrate for employment, change to a different crop, or neglect their land. Abandoned orchards can become sources of reinfection for nearby farms, which adds pressure to whole regions. Recovery often requires replanting, and replanting means waiting again. This is one reason the chocolate you see on a shelf is connected to long timelines and real vulnerability. There is a crop behind the smooth bar that could be disrupted by uncontrollable factors. Disease management is not only biology, it is survival planning. Cacao pods can sprout straight from the bark, a trait called cauliflory. There is something startling about seeing fruit sprout from a tree's trunk, as if the bark itself decided to bloom. This growth style allows cacao to support heavy pods close to the tree's strongest wood, rather than risking thin branches. It also changes how harvesting works. Farmers can reach pods along the trunk and main limbs, using tools that cut the stem cleanly, without injuring the tree's flowering points. Those points can produce again, so careful cuts protect future seasons. Cauliflory also creates a special kind of visibility. Pods do not hide in leafy tips far overhead. They hang where you can watch them swell and change color, almost like ornaments you check each day. This trait is not just a botanical curiosity. It is a structural solution that lets cacao carry weight safely over months. The tree is built for patience, and its fruit grows in the most stable place it can find. Chocolate's aroma comes from hundreds of compounds, far beyond cocoa alone. When you smell chocolate, you are not smelling one thing. You are smelling a crowded city of molecules that formed across many steps, then gathered into one warm impression. Some compounds suggest roasted bread, others hint at fruit, nuts, spice, or flowers. Your brain stitches them into a single word, chocolate, even though it is more like a chord than a note. What makes this even more fascinating is that the mix can change dramatically with small choices. A few degrees in roasting can tilt the balance toward toast or toward brightness. A longer dry can mute one set of aromas and lift another. Even storage matters, because aroma compounds can fade or shift over time. That is why 2 bars can both be called dark chocolate, yet smell like 2 different worlds. The label is simple. The chemistry is wildly busy. Chocolate's fat can carry aromas upward, making flavor feel louder. Flavor is partly chemistry and partly timing, and fat controls timing beautifully. Cocoa butter can store, transport, and release aroma compounds more slowly and sustainably because many of them dissolve well in fats. For this reason, chocolate may appear to develop gradually. You might notice one note at first, then another appears as the chocolate warms and spreads. The aroma persists long after the chocolate is gone because fat also forms a coating that can prolong the finish. There is more to this than just intensity. It has to do with form. A low-fat chocolate can deliver flavor in a quick burst, then drop off abruptly. A well-balanced fat profile can make the experience feel fuller and longer, almost like a song with a clear beginning and a long, fading final chord. Chocolate's texture and aroma are inextricably linked because of this carry effect. The flavor narrative also shifts when the fat behavior is altered. Cocoa butter has a narrow melting range, so it turns liquid quickly. That quick shift is why chocolate can feel firm in your fingers, then suddenly silky in your mouth. Cocoa butter changes phase over a tight band of temperatures, so a small rise in warmth makes a big difference. It also means chocolate is sensitive to its surroundings. A bar left near a sunny window can soften sooner than you expect, while the same bar in a cool cupboard stays crisp and snappy. There is more to this limited melting behavior than just enjoyment. It is also about performance. Chocolate's ability to coat fruit, set on a truffle, and maintain its shape in your hand are all impacted. When makers choose recipes, they are thinking about melt as much as taste. They want a texture that yields at the right moment, then carries aroma upward as it goes. You can sense engineering in action in a matter of seconds. Cooling chocolate too fast can trap unstable crystals and dull the snap. Chocolate needs time to settle into a strong internal structure, and rushing that cooling can leave it half-organized. When the temperature drops too quickly, cocoa butter can form crystal types that look acceptable at first, but do not hold their shape well. The surface may lose shine, and the break can feel soft or crumbly instead of clean. You might even notice that the chocolate melts in an uneven way, with a waxy drag that interrupts the smooth glide you expect. This is why chocolatiers pay attention to cooling rooms, cooling tunnels, and even the temperature of molds. Making chocolate hard is not the only objective. Allowing the proper crystals to grow in a systematic manner, like cautious stacking as opposed to a hasty pile, is the aim. A good snap is not a sound effect. It is a sign that the invisible architecture had time to form properly. Chocolate that has been properly tempered contracts slightly to help it come out of molds. There is a small moment of relief in a chocolate kitchen when a mold is tapped and the pieces fall out cleanly. That easy release is often a sign that the chocolate cooled into the right crystal structure. Well-tempered chocolate slightly contracts as it sets, which causes it to pull away from the mold's surface. The outcome has an impact on appearance in addition to practicality. Edges come out sharp, details show clearly, and the surface keeps its gloss. When temper is off, chocolate can cling stubbornly, and it can leave smears or dull patches that look tired before anyone takes a bite. Molding is a silent test of skill because of this. It is necessary to persuade the chocolate to act like a solid that is capable of letting go. When it does, the piece feels like it was born cleanly, not forced into shape. The snap you hear is a mechanical signature of crystal structure. Not only is that sharp break satisfying, but it also provides information. When you bite into a well-set bar, the sound comes from a solid network that fractures in a clean, brittle way. If the crystal network is strong and uniform, it breaks sharply and the sound is bright. If the structure is softer or disorganized, the bar may bend, crumble, or break with a dull thud. What your fingers would notice is also picked up by your ears. Snap is a little physics lesson you can taste. It also connects to how chocolate melts. A bar with a strong crystal structure can still melt quickly, but it melts with a smoother transition. That combination is part of what people call quality, even if they never say the word crystals. Observe how your brain trusts that break the next time you hear it. The sound tells you something about what is coming before the flavor even arrives. Chocolate's smoothness depends on particle size, not only on ingredients. You can use wonderful cacao and still end up with chocolate that feels gritty, because texture is built at a microscopic scale. Chocolate contains solid particles, like cocoa solids and sugar suspended in fat. If those particles are too large, your tongue reads them as sand. If they are fine enough, the same recipe feels like velvet. For this reason, refining is important. Makers run chocolate through rollers or mills that gradually reduce particle size, and they aim for a threshold where the mouth stops noticing individual grains. The fascinating part is how the experience changes without changing flavor. A smooth texture allows the same scents to spread evenly, making them seem louder all of a sudden. Smoothness also changes how long a piece seems to last, because it melts and coats more uniformly. It serves as a reminder that taste involves both touch and chemistry in the nose. Chocolate is eaten with the tongue as much as with the brain. Gritty chocolate often means sugar particles stayed too large. In addition to being sweet, sugar can act like tiny pebbles if it is not sufficiently refined. Even if the cacao is good, the chocolate will feel rough if those particles are still big enough to scrape against the tongue. This roughness can also change the flavor impression. Sweetness can feel sharper because the sugar hits in concentrated bursts rather than dissolving smoothly across the mouth. In some cases, the grittiness is not from sugar alone. It can come from cocoa solids that were not ground fine enough or from an uneven blend. Still, sugar is often the main culprit because its crystals start out large and angular. Skilled makers treat refinement as a form of patience. They give the chocolate enough time and pressure to become a true suspension, not a sweet gravel mixture held together by fat. The sweetness feels calmer, and the entire bar is easier to listen to when the texture becomes silky. Some makers add extra cocoa butter to make chocolate silkier. There is more to cocoa butter than just flavor. It is a texture tool. When a maker increases it slightly, the chocolate can flow more smoothly during production, and it can feel more luxurious when it melts. Even without adding dairy, the bar can appear creamier thanks to the extra cocoa butter that facilitates particles sliding past one another. It can also change how the chocolate behaves on the palate. Instead of a quick melt followed by dryness, you get a longer, smoother finish that feels polished. However, there is a trade-off. Too much cocoa butter can make a bar feel thin in flavor because the intensity of cocoa solids becomes more diluted. The most compelling recipes treat cocoa batter like lighting in a room. A little more can reveal details and make everything glow. Too much can wash out the contrast. When you find a bar that feels impossibly smooth yet still tastes deep, you are tasting a careful balance, not an accident. Lecithin helps chocolate flow so bars can be thinner and smoother. Lecithin is used in tiny amounts, but its impact can be huge. It improves the way fat interacts with solid particles, making it easier for chocolate to flow. This means that a maker can use less cocoa butter to achieve the same pourability, which can be significant for both cost and recipe design. In practical terms, better flow helps chocolate fill molds cleanly, coat candies evenly, and release air bubbles that would otherwise leave pockmarks. It can also improve mouthfeel because a well-flowing chocolate tends to spread more evenly across the tongue. Lecithin is often derived from soy or sunflower, and the choice can matter for labeling and for subtle flavor preferences. The fascinating part is how invisible it is when used well. Lecithin is not a distinct flavor. You feel its effect as ease, as smoothness, as chocolate that behaves like a liquid when warm, and a crisp solid when cooled. It is a small ingredient that acts like a traffic controller, keeping everything moving. Chocolate concedes, with a drop of water turning into a stiff paste. It looks like a disaster because one moment the chocolate is glossy and fluid, and the next it becomes thick and clumpy. The reason is counterintuitive. When a small amount of water is added to a mixture of dry particles coated in fat, the sugar and cocoa particles begin to dissolve just enough to adhere to one another. The fat is no longer able to keep them apart as they group together into a dense mass. The texture changes instantly, like wet sand tightening into a ball. This is why steam from a pot, a damp spoon, or a single droplet can ruin a bowl of melted chocolate. It is not about cleanliness. It is about how sensitive the suspension is to moisture. Once seized, the chocolate is not unsafe. It is simply no longer usable for dipping and coating. Instead of discarding it out of frustration, the trick is to know what it might become. Seized chocolate can be rescued by adding more liquid than using it differently. The way out of seizing is not to fight the water. It is to commit to it. If you add enough liquid, the clumped particles can disperse again, and the mixture can become smooth. But it will no longer behave like pure melted chocolate. Instead, it becomes a chocolate sauce or a base for a ganache, depending on what you add and how much. Warm water can work, milk can work, cream can work. In order to prevent the mixture from tightening again, it is important to add the ingredients gradually while stirring continuously. Once it smooths out, you can use it for drizzling, making hot chocolate, filling cakes, or creating truffles, where a different texture is actually the goal. This kitchen physics lesson is very enjoyable. A mistake becomes a fork in the road, and the chocolate takes a new role. The rescue is not pretending the original plan still exists. The rescue is letting the material become what it now wants to be, then using that result with confidence. Couverture chocolate contains more cocoa butter made for glossy coatings. Couverture is the kind of chocolate that behaves like satin when it is warmed and worked. The extra cocoa butter makes it flow more readily, which matters when you want a thin, even shell around a truffle or a perfectly smooth curtain over a cookie. With a chocolate that is too thick, coatings can pool at the bottom and set with ridges. With this style, the coating can settle into a clean layer that cracks neatly when you bite. It also captures a shine that looks almost wet when it is set well. Couverture is selected for performance as much as flavor in professional kitchens. It is chocolate designed to move, to cling, and to set with elegance. When you see a bonbon that looks like polished glass, there is a good chance couverture helped make that finish possible. Baking chocolate is often less sweet, designed to be balanced in recipes. Baking chocolate is not meant to be eaten like a candy bar, and that is the whole point. It serves as a solid base upon which a recipe can determine the ultimate sweetness. In a brownie batter, sugar is already coming from other sources. If the chocolate itself were very sweet, the result could tip into syrupy and flat. Less sweet chocolate also lets cocoa character stay present after baking, when heat can dull delicate aromas. This is why many bakers prefer unsweetened or bittersweet options for serious desserts. You can control sweetness with granulated sugar, brown sugar, or honey, and each brings a different texture and aroma. Baking chocolate is also useful because it melts into mixtures smoothly, then disappears into the structure of a cake or sauce without leaving a separate sugary, crass identity. It is a tool ingredient designed to be shaped by the rest of the recipe. Chocolate chips are formulated to hold shape, so they melt more slowly. A chip's job is different from a bar's job. In a cookie, you often want pockets of chocolate that stay distinct after the oven, not a brown puddle that vanishes into the dough. Many chips are designed with that goal in mind. They can include less cocoa butter or a different balance of ingredients, so they soften but resist fully flowing. This is why a handful of chips melted in a bowl can behave oddly compared with chopped chocolate. They may thicken sooner, and they may keep tiny lumps. That stubbornness turns into a quality when baking. Chips hold their edges long enough to create contrast, so you get a bite of warm cookie and a separate burst of chocolate. If you want a sauce or a glossy ganache, chopped bar chocolate often works better. Chips shine if you want chocolate landmarks in a cookie. Drinking chocolate and hot chocolate are two different things. Many people use the names interchangeably, but the experience can be worlds apart. Hot chocolate is often built from cocoa powder mixed with sugar, then blended with milk or water. It can be light, quick, and easy to sip. Drinking chocolate is usually made by melting real chocolate into warm liquid, which brings more cocoa butter and more cocoa solids into the cup. The result can feel thicker and more indulgent, with a deeper aroma that lingers after each swallow. The difference is not only richness, it is texture and structure. Cocoa powder disperses as particles. Melted chocolate creates a fuller body. This is why drinking chocolate can feel almost like dessert served in a mug, while hot chocolate can feel like a warm comfort drink. If you ever wondered why one cup tastes thin and another tastes like velvet, you are tasting two different approaches to the same beloved idea. Because it retains more cocoa solids, traditional drinking chocolate can be thick. In some traditions, a cup of chocolate is closer to pudding than to milk. The thickness comes from keeping more solid cocoa material in the drink and from using methods that help it stay suspended. Certain versions are vigorously whisked to produce a foam that alters mouthfeel and transports scent upward. Others use starches or finely ground chocolate to build body, so the drink coats the tongue and slows the experience. The flavor is also altered by that thickness. When the liquid is dense, bitterness can feel softer, and sweetness can feel more rounded because everything arrives more slowly. A thick cup also stays warm longer, which keeps aroma active. It becomes a small ritual. You sip, you pause, and the flavor keeps unfolding. This style of drinking chocolate is not about hydration. It is about immersion, like stepping into the taste instead of skimming across it. It reminds you that chocolate's history includes the cup, not only the bar. Chocolate ice cream tastes richer when cocoa is bloomed in warm liquid first. Cocoa powder can be stubborn. If you stir it into something cold, it can clump and taste dusty, as if the flavor never fully woke up. Blooming is the simple trick that changes that. You mix cocoa with a warm liquid, often milk, cream, or even hot water, and you give it time to hydrate and dissolve. Heat helps release aroma compounds, and it lets the cocoa particles disperse more evenly. The result is not just smoother ice cream, it is deeper chocolate flavor that feels integrated rather than sprinkled in. Blooming can also make the finished scoop taste less bitter because the cocoa has had a chance to soften and mingle before it is frozen. Many great chocolate desserts start with this small step, and it feels almost like a spell. You are not adding more cocoa, you are helping the cocoa you already have finally show up fully. Pairing chocolate with certain fruits highlights hidden acidity and brightness. Chocolate may appear heavy, but the right fruit can bring out its inherent lightness. When you pair dark chocolate with raspberries, cherries, or orange, the fruit's acidity can lift the flavor and make it feel more vivid. It is like turning on a light in a room you thought you knew. The fruit does not only add its own taste, it changes what you notice in the chocolate, pulling forward notes that might otherwise stay buried, like tang berry-like hints or a clean, sharp finish. The pairing works best when neither side is too sweet. Chocolate may appear flat if the fruit is overly sweet. A fruit that is bright and fresh creates contrast, and contrast creates clarity. This explains why chocolate and strawberries feel timeless, and why chocolate-covered citrus peel can taste so vibrant. You are not just combining flavors, you are revealing them. Coffee can make chocolate seem deeper because roasted aromas overlap. Your nose detects the similarities between coffee and chocolate before your tongue does. Both develop many of their most recognizable aromas through roasting. When you drink coffee alongside chocolate, those roasted notes can reinforce each other, so the chocolate seems darker and more complex. At the same time, coffee's bitterness can make the chocolate's sweetness feel more pronounced by comparison. That creates a satisfying push and pull. This is why an espresso can make a small piece of chocolate feel larger, as if the flavor expands in your mouth. Depending on the coffee, the pairing may also change. A bright, fruity coffee can pull out sharper notes in chocolate, while the smoky, deep roast can emphasize cocoa richness. In desserts like tiramisu or mocha cake, the combination works because it builds layers without needing extra ingredients. Coffee does not replace chocolate, it amplifies it like a backing instrument that makes the main melody feel louder. Certain cheeses balance fat, salt, and bitterness when paired with dark chocolate. It sounds strange until you try it slowly. Cheese brings salt and tang, and those can soften the perception of bitterness in a dark bar. Because it coats the mouth and can make chocolate feel smoother and less sharp, the fattening cheese also alters the texture. Certain pairings are especially pleasing. A nutty aged cheese can echo chocolate's roasted tones. A creamy blue cheese can create a dramatic contrast where sweetness, salt, and pungency take turns in the spotlight. The key is portion and pacing. You want a small bite of cheese, then a small piece of chocolate, and a pause to let the flavors meet. This is not about making chocolate taste like cheese. It is about balance, and about discovering that chocolate is more flexible than its dessert reputation suggests. When combined properly, both foods taste more like themselves rather than less. The slow, sniff, snap, and melt techniques used for wine tasting are also used for chocolate. Tasting well is a way of paying attention, and chocolate rewards attention almost immediately. You start by smelling the surface, because aroma tells you what direction the flavors may travel. Then you listen for the break, which hints at structure and texture. Next comes the slow melt. You observe how the flavor shifts from the initial seconds to the last aftertaste, as you allow it to soften without hurrying. Certain notes emerge early and then fade. Some arrive like a second chapter. You can even notice how your breathing changes the experience, because exhaling through the nose carries aroma into fuller focus. This ritual is not about being fancy. It is about discovering that chocolate has movement. It evolves while you eat it. When you taste this way, a small square can feel like a long story, with an opening, a middle, and a finish that stays with you. Cacao was introduced to Europe as a luxury drink before it became a bar. When cacao first arrived in Europe, it did not arrive as a snack. It arrived as a drink meant for the wealthy, served in fashionable rooms, and treated like an exotic treasure from far away. It was prepared hot, often with sugar and spices, and it demanded equipment, time, and access. That rarity gave it status. It was something you were offered to impress you, not something you grabbed on the street. For a while, chocolate's identity in Europe was closer to coffeehouse culture than to candy. It was sipped, talked about, and shown. That is significant because it influenced expectations. Chocolate became associated with refinement and indulgence long before factories made it cheap. Even the cups and utensils around it carried symbolism. The bar came later, after technology and trade made chocolate easier to store, ship, and sell widely. The first European chocolate was a beverage that declared sophistication rather than practicality. Early European chocolate was often medicinal, sold as an energizing tonic. In early modern Europe, many foods were also treated as remedies, and chocolate was pulled into that world quickly, particularly when combined with sugar, spices, and occasionally other ingredients selected for purported pain relief. It was described as strengthening, warming, and restorative. Benefits people did not need to see laboratory evidence to believe it. They required a compelling narrative, a lasting impact, and an authority who would attest to it. Chocolate fit the role because it felt rich, sustaining, and special. It could be served to someone recovering or offered to someone expected to work hard. Additionally, because expensive imports were handled in both elite kitchens and apothecaries, it passed through networks where pharmacy and cuisine overlapped. This medicinal framing helped chocolate spread socially because it gave indulgence a respectable excuse. You were not necessarily drinking something decadent, you were taking something that seemed beneficial. That story softened cultural resistance, and it helped cacao settle into European life. Sugar transformed cacao from bitter status drink into a mass sweet. Cacao on its own can be challenging, and that challenge shaped who embraced it. Sugar changed the social equation. Chocolate could change from an acquired taste to something immediately palatable once sugar became more readily available. Sweetness did more than just cover up resentment. It made chocolate feel like comfort, and it widened the audience dramatically. A drink that once signaled elite ritual could now become a treat for children, a snack for workers, and a gift for holidays. It also altered the kinds of flavors people expected. Caramel notes, creamy textures, and dessert pairings that would have seemed strange in a bitter ceremonial cup could be supported by chocolate with more sugar. Sugar also made chocolate easier to standardize for consistent selling because sweetness is a quick way to create familiarity. This transformation was not only culinary, it was cultural. It turned cacao into a product that could be loved at first taste, which is a powerful engine for popularity. The invention of the cocoa press changed chocolate by separating fat from solids. Before the cocoa press, chocolate was harder to control. The number of textures and products that could be produced consistently was limited because the fat and solids remained together. The press changed that by squeezing cocoa butter out of the chocolate mass. Manufacturers could now work with two different materials. Cocoa butter became its own ingredient for smoothness and melt. The remaining solids could be ground into cocoa powder, which opened new possibilities for baking and drinks. Recipe tuning was also made simpler by this division. Want a richer bar? Add more cocoa butter. Do you want a cake that tastes darker without being overly fatty? Use cocoa powder. Innovation resulted from the press's new set of controls for chocolate manufacturers. It also helped chocolate travel because powders and pressed products could be stored and shipped in different ways. One mechanical invention expanded the entire chocolate universe from the bar to the pantry shelf. When dried milk could be produced consistently, milk chocolate became feasible. Milk is delicate. Fresh milk spoils quickly, and that used to make it difficult to blend into shelf-stable sweets at scale. The development of reliable dried milk changed that because it brought milk's proteins and sugars into a form that could travel and wait. Once those milk solids could be mixed into chocolate, a new style was born. It tasted softer, sweeter, and more approachable, and it could be sold widely without the same spoilage worries. Milk chocolate also introduced a new texture expectation. The bar could feel creamier and less intense, which invited a different kind of audience. It also gave makers another dimension to design. They could balance cocoa strength against dairy warmth, creating profiles that ranged from light and caramel-like to rich and cocoa-forward. This change did not only add an ingredient, it added a new emotional identity. Many people found comfort in the taste of milk chocolate, which was made possible by a technological solution to the fragility of milk. The modern chocolate bar depends on industrial grinding, fine enough for smoothness. It's not just about what you put in a chocolate bar, it's also about how small you can make it. Because it takes effort to reduce particles to a truly silky size, early chocolate may be uneven, rough, and gritty. That was altered by industrial grinding. With powerful rollers and refiners, makers could consistently push sugar and cocoa particles below the threshold your tongue easily detects. That smoothness became a standard, and once people got used to it, it was hard to go back. The mouth interprets smoothness as care, so even though the chocolate was mass-produced, the smooth bar made it feel more opulent. The spread of flavor is also impacted by fine grinding. A smoother chocolate coats the tongue more evenly, which can make aroma seem fuller and sweetness feel more integrated. In other words, industry did not only make chocolate cheaper, it changed what people thought chocolate was supposed to feel like. The modern bar is built on invisible size control. Some chocolate brands built entire towns shaping labor and social history. Chocolate is often sold as romance, but its industrial past includes factories large enough to shape whole communities. Some companies built housing schools and services around their plants, creating company towns where work and daily life were closely linked. For workers, this could mean stability and amenities that were not common elsewhere. It could also mean dependency, because your employer could influence where you lived, where you shopped, and how your family's life was organized. These towns reveal how chocolate moved from craft to industry. They also show how a sweet product can sit at the center of serious social questions, like labor conditions, welfare programs, and control. The factory did not only produce bars, it produced schedules, relationships, and identities. When you see a brand name that feels nostalgic, it can carry this hidden infrastructure behind it. Chocolate's history includes the built environment, not just recipes. A bar can be connected to streets and schools you have never seen. Wartime rations used chocolate for calories, morale, and portability. In wartime, food has to do several jobs at once. It must provide energy, survive, transport, and lift spirits in exhausting conditions. Chocolate fit that brief well. It is calorie-dense, relatively compact, and widely liked, which makes it valuable when space and morale both matter. A small portion can carry a lot of fuel, and it can be eaten quickly without preparation. That practicality gave chocolate a serious role that contrasts with its dessert image. Additionally, it forced manufacturers to consider durability. Chocolate can melt and it can bloom, so making it travel-ready required careful formulation and packaging. Chocolate may be a taste of everyday life for soldiers who are far from home, and the emotional impact is significant. A familiar flavor can steady the mind when everything else feels unstable. This is one of the reasons chocolate keeps coming up in historical narratives. It was not only a treat, it was a tool, and sometimes a comfort object. There used to be intense competition among chocolate factories over texture, shine, and shelf life. Once chocolate became industrial, competition moved into details that most eaters never name. A company that could make a bar that stayed glossy longer, snapped more cleanly, and resisted turning dull in storage gained an edge on the shelf. Texture became a selling point, even when it was not advertised openly, because consumers learned to trust mouthfeel. Shelf life mattered for distribution, since chocolate had to travel farther and sit longer without looking tired. Shine mattered, because the eye decides first, and a glossy bar reads as fresh and premium. This competition drove process improvements. Manufacturers refined temperature control mixing methods and packaging choices. In order to maintain batch consistency, they also standardized quality checks. The result is that modern expectations for chocolate are partly shaped by industrial rivalry. Many of the sensory features people now treat as normal were once advantages fought over like secrets. A history of quiet engineering struggles fought in factories with thermometers and machinery lies behind a smooth bite. Chocolate became more than just a food, thanks to advertising. Chocolate did not become a universal gift by accident. Advertising and packaging taught people how to think about it. A bar is edible, but a boxed assortment can become a message. And that message can be romance, gratitude, apology, or celebration. Marketers leaned into that emotional flexibility. They used holidays, ribbons, and shared rituals to connect chocolate with occasions, so buying it felt like participating in a tradition. The product developed a second identity over time. It was no longer only a thing you consumed, it was a thing you gave to represent how you felt. This change had an impact on design as well. Boxes turned into mementos, shapes became symbolic, limited editions appeared to match seasons. The fascinating part is how quickly the brain learns this language. You can feel a social meaning in a chocolate gift before you taste anything. Although that meaning is created in the mind, it has great power. Advertising did not only sell chocolate, it sold a role for chocolate in human relationships. Cocoa farming supports millions of livelihoods, yet prices can be volatile. Although a chocolate bar may appear serene and certain, the farming that goes into it is frequently not. Many cacao growers rely on small pots, and their income can swing with global prices they do not control. A strong harvest in one region can push prices down elsewhere. Demand and supply can shift overnight due to a disease outbreak or a disruption in shipping. Farmers may find it difficult to pay for labor, tools, or pruning when prices decline, which could lower future yields and create a painful cycle. Because intermediate steps in the supply chain take a cut, the benefits of price increases are not always distributed equally. This is why some farmers diversify growing bananas, cassava, or timber alongside cacao to steady income. Chocolate is delicious, but it is also a livelihood system. Every bite connects to weather, markets, and the daily math of families trying to plan a year ahead. Ethical chocolate sourcing often depends on traceability, not just labels. Although a label may seem reassuring, it cannot reveal the true origin of the beans. Traceability is the difference between a story and a trackable path. It entails understanding which area provided the cacao, which buying station or cooperative handled it, and occasionally which farm or collection of farms produced it. That chain matters because ethical problems hide in anonymity. When cacao from many sources is mixed, it becomes harder to reward good practices or correct harmful ones. Traceable systems can pay premiums for quality and for verified standards, and they can also support training and long-term relationships. To help buyers follow the trail, some manufacturers release sourcing maps, lot codes, or direct trade information. This is not perfect, and it is not always simple, but it changes incentives. When origins are visible, responsibility becomes harder to dodge. Chocolate becomes less like a mystery blend and more like a product with a known biography. Monitoring and reform initiatives are motivated by the risks of child labor in cacao regions. Cacao is labor-intensive, and in some growing areas, there are serious risks that children may be pulled into unsafe or inappropriate work. Governments, businesses, and non-profits have been compelled by this reality to develop community-based safeguards, school support initiatives, and monitoring systems. One important point is that the problem is linked to poverty and weak local services, not to one simple villain. When families lack stable income, and when schools are distant or under-resourced, pressure rises. That is why solutions often focus on improving household earnings, strengthening education access, and verifying labor conditions through independent checks. Many chocolate companies now face public expectations to show evidence of progress, not only promises. Consumers also play a role by supporting brands that publish clear sourcing information and report on their efforts. This topic is uncomfortable, but it matters, because chocolate should not come at the cost of a child's safety or future. Agroforestry cacao can store carbon-linking chocolate to climate solutions. Cacao does not have to grow in a bare field. In agroforestry systems, cacao is grown alongside other trees, creating layers of vegetation that resemble a managed forest. Those extra trees can store carbon in wood and soil, while also providing shade, leaf litter, and habitat. Agroforestry can help farmers become less dependent on cacao by providing them with other products, like fruit, nuts, or timber. It can also improve resilience. Diverse plantings can help stabilize soil, reduce erosion, and buffer temperature spikes. This does not automatically make every farm sustainable, and it requires good management to avoid pests and maintain yields. Still, the idea is powerful. A chocolate landscape can be designed to support climate goals rather than fight them. Chocolate ceases to be merely a dessert crop when you consider cacao as a component of a forest system. It turns into a land use decision with worldwide ramifications. Because cacao detests extreme heat, climate change poses a threat to cacao yields. Cacao is a plant that prefers consistency, and climate change is pushing many regions toward instability. Hotter days can stress trees, and shifting rainfall can disrupt flowering and pod development, while heavier downpours can increase disease pressure by maintaining damp conditions. Longer dry seasons can increase water stress. Even small changes in local climate can matter. Because cacao already grows within a narrow comfort zone, farmers can adjust by selecting hardier varieties, increasing the number of shade trees they plant, or enhancing soil moisture retention. In some places, production may move to higher elevations, where temperatures are cooler, though that shift brings its own land and livelihood challenges. The stakes are high because cacao trees take years to mature. You cannot swap crops overnight without major consequences. Chocolate's future will be shaped not only by taste trends, but by whether cacao landscapes can stay suitable in a warming world, and whether farming communities can afford the adaptations required. Scientists breed cacao for disease resistance while trying to keep flavor. Breeding cacao is like trying to upgrade a house without changing the view. You want trees that resist disease and tolerate stress, but you also want beans that still make wonderful chocolate. That is difficult because traits can be linked. A variety that thrives in the field may produce a flavor profile that is less aromatic, or it may ferment differently. In order to assess farm performance and bean quality over time, researchers and breeders test seedlings and choose parent trees. That timeline is long because cacao trees do not give quick feedback. The goal is not a single super tree, but a toolkit of varieties that can fit different regions and challenges. Some breeding programs partner with farmers and chocolate makers, so flavor is tested in real-world conditions, not only in a lab. When it functions, it simultaneously preserves pleasure and safeguards livelihoods. The bar you eat in the future may carry years of patient selection inside it. To prevent the extinction of rare varieties, some researchers map the genomes of cacao. A cacao tree holds its future inside its DNA, and researchers have been working to read and map that genetic information. Genome mapping makes it possible to determine the relationships between various cacao populations, which trees have beneficial characteristics, and which rare lineages may be in danger of going extinct. Genetic diversity is insurance, so this is important. A rare variety might contain resistance to a disease that has not spread widely, or it might hold flavor potential that could be lost if the trees vanish. Mapping also supports conservation efforts in seed banks and living collections where genetic material is preserved for breeding and restoration. For chocolate lovers, this science has a quiet payoff. It increases the chance that future chocolate can remain diverse and resilient rather than collapsing into a narrow set of beans. Additionally, it serves as a reminder that chocolate is not just a manufactured good, but also a wild biological resource. Protecting cacao genetics is like protecting a language before it goes silent. New fermentation techniques can fine-tune flavor like a microbial orchestra. Fermentation used to be treated as something you simply endured, then hoped went well. Increasingly, makers are treating it as a place for careful guidance. Certain experiments employ carefully chosen starter cultures of bacteria or yeast strains that can direct the process towards specific results. Others focus on controlling temperature, oxygen, and turning schedules with more precision, so batches develop more consistently. The aim is not to sterilize cacao or make it taste artificial. The aim is to reduce unpleasant surprises and to highlight desired notes like fruitiness, nuttiness, or floral tones. This is especially useful for farmers and cooperatives selling to premium markets, where consistent quality can earn better prices. The fact that fermentation is a living system that undergoes hourly changes makes it an intriguing science. Treat it well, and it can create complexity that feels almost impossible to design deliberately. The better we understand the microbes, the more chocolate becomes a collaboration between biology and craft. Ruby chocolate gets its color from special cacao processing, not added dye. Ruby chocolate looks like it belongs in the fruit aisle, with a pink tone that surprises people who expect chocolate to be brown or cream-colored. The striking aspect is that red dye is not usually used to create this color. Instead, it comes from a specific approach to selecting and processing cacao, preserving particular compounds that deliver both color and a bright, tangy flavor. Impression. The result tastes different from dark, milk, or white styles. It can feel lightly fruity and sharp, even without fruit added. Because of this, it serves as an example of how processing can produce completely new categories rather than merely variations. Ruby chocolate also demonstrates how taste is shaped by our eyes. Before the first bite, the color pink creates expectations that alter our perception of what we smell and feel. Whether you like it or not, it broadens the potential of cacao. It is chocolate as a new branch on a familiar tree. Plant-based milk chocolates require fat and protein tricks to mimic dairy. Milk chocolate is not only sweet, it is creamy, and that creaminess comes from dairy proteins, sugars, and fats working together. When makers create plant-based versions, they have to recreate that balance without using cow's milk. Different plant components present different difficulties. Oat can add softness, but it can also bring cereal notes. Almonds can add nuttiness, but if the fat balance is off, it may feel thin. Some recipes use emulsifiers to keep everything blended and add cocoa butter or other fats to restore a smooth melt. Protein is important because it influences how flavor is perceived and how the chocolate melts. Making a bar that tastes like a salad is not the aim. The goal is to make a bar that feels familiar, with a clean finish and a creamy texture. When it succeeds, it is a clever piece of food design, built from constraints and careful sensory testing. Cocoa butter is used in cosmetics because it melts and spreads smoothly. That same melt you love in a chocolate bar is useful on skin. It stays solid in the jar, which makes it easy to store and scoop. Then it softens with body warmth and glides into a thin layer that feels protective. This is why you find it in lip balms, lotions, and body butters. It can help slow moisture loss by creating a barrier, which is especially welcome in dry air or after washing. It also has a mild scent that plays well with vanilla, citrus, and floral fragrances, so it rarely fights the perfume choices around it. In older home traditions, people used it as a simple balm for rough hands and wind-chapped lips. Modern formulators like it for texture control, because it can make a product feel rich without feeling greasy. Chocolate has a second life in the bathroom, and it begins with the same fat. For centuries, bitter medicinal flavors have been covered up by chocolate. Bitterness is one of the strongest taste warnings the body has, and it can make medicine hard to swallow. Chocolate helps because it brings sweetness, fat, and powerful aroma. Sweetness can reduce how bitter compounds are perceived. Fat can coat the tongue and slow the direct contact between the bitter molecules and taste receptors. Aroma does another kind of work. Your brain anticipates comfort when your nose detects chocolate notes, and this expectation can mellow the entire experience. Because of this, chocolate has long been used by homes and pharmacies to transport offensive flavors, particularly in concoctions that must be consumed orally. Chewables and syrups with chocolate flavors are still available today. They do not erase the medicine. They alter the timing of taste and divert the senses. It is a small lesson in perception. When you change smell and mouthfeel, you can change what the tongue reports. Cocoa flavanols can affect blood flow, though processing can reduce them. Cacao contains flavanols, which are natural compounds that have been studied for effects on blood vessels and circulation. Some research suggests they can support the body's ability to widen blood vessels, which can influence blood flow. The crucial twist is that the final product's yield can vary greatly. Many steps that make chocolate taste smoother can also lower flavanol levels, including certain types of processing and heavy roasting. This implies that two seemingly similar chocolate products may offer quite different results. It also means that chocolates and cocoa powders sold for flavanols are frequently produced with extra care to preserve them. This is not a reason to treat candy as medicine, and it is not a promise of the same effect for everyone. It's just another way that cacao demonstrates its complexity. Although they don't always go hand in hand, flavor chemistry and health chemistry can overlap. Darker chocolate is not always higher quality because recipes vary widely. Color can fool us. A very dark bar might look intense and serious, but quality depends on many choices that darkness does not reveal. A maker can push color darker with certain cocoa powders or deeper roasting, and the result can taste flat or harsh. Because the beans were handled carefully and the roast was thoughtful, another maker can create a slightly lighter bar that tastes vibrant and complex. Quality also includes texture. A dark bar can still be gritty if refining was rushed. It can still taste stale if storage was poor. Even sweetness balance matters. A bar can taste a single note even if it is dark, while a lighter bar can unfold in layers. Darkness can signal cocoa content. It can also be a style choice. The safest approach is to judge by aroma, melt, and finish, rather than by shade alone. Paint chips are not made of chocolate. There are numerous ways for this crafted dish to be successful or unsuccessful. A bar's percentage indicates its cocoa content rather than just its sweetness. A percentage sounds like a sweetness meter, but it is really a composition clue. It tells you how much of the bar comes from cacao ingredients, which usually means cocoa solids plus cocoa butter. The remaining portion is mostly sugar and sometimes milk solids in milk chocolate styles. This is why two bars with the same percentage can taste very different. One could feel smoother and use more cocoa butter. Another could feel drier and require less cocoa butter. The cacao itself also matters. A bar with a high percentage of harsh beans may have an aggressive flavor. A slightly lower percentage bar made from aromatic beans can taste more nuanced and satisfying. The percentage also does not tell you much about added flavorings, salt, or the skill of fermentation and roasting upstream. Think of it as a map, not the whole landscape. Although it can help you anticipate intensity, it cannot guarantee pleasure. When you smell it and let it melt, true story starts. Some bars list cacao origin, like a passport naming farms and harvests. Chocolate can be anonymous, or it can be traceable, like fine coffee. Some makers print details that read like travel documents. A region may be referred to as a farm, a cooperative, or even a harvest season. This is not only romance, it is accountability and craft. When a maker commits to a specific source, they can build relationships, pay for quality, and learn how that cacao behaves each season. As a listener and taster, it makes the bar seem like a real place. It encourages comparison as well. You might notice that one origin tends toward bright fruit notes, while another leans toward deep roasted warmth. These labels can also protect farmers who do excellent work, because their name is attached to the result. It is a shift from commodity to identity. A passport-style label says this bar came from somewhere specific, and someone is willing to be known for it. Chocolate's flavor can linger because fats hold aromas longer in the mouth. A long finish is not only a poetic idea, it's physics. As you breathe and swallow, fats can dissolve aroma compounds and release them gradually. Cocoa butter coats the mouth in a thin film, and that film acts like a slow diffuser. Traces of aroma may continue to rise into the back of the nose even after the chocolate has been consumed. Because of this, some bars seem to reverberate for minutes, with late notes that show up just when you think the story is finished. Additionally, this lingering can alter your memory of a bar. A short finish can feel simple, even if the first bite was exciting. A long finish can feel luxurious because it keeps you engaged without more chewing. It is also why water and tea pair so well with chocolate. They can clear the palate, then let you notice what remains. The melt is the beginning, but the lingering is where many chocolates reveal their best secrets. The same aroma molecules are frequently responsible for the chocolate note in perfumes. To create a chocolate impression, perfumers do not require melted chocolate. They can build it from aroma molecules that overlap with roasted cacao, caramelized sugars, and warm woods. Some of these molecules also show up naturally during cacao roasting, which is why the bridge feels believable. In perfume, the chocolate note is usually more about suggestion than dessert. It can add warmth, depth, and comfort, and it can make other notes feel smoother. Paired with vanilla, it becomes creamy. Paired with citrus, it becomes playful. Paired with smoky woods, it becomes dark and sophisticated. This serves as a helpful reminder that chocolate has just as much aroma as flavor. You are already in the realm of perfumers if you close your eyes and take a whiff of a premium bar. Chocolate absorbs into the body, whereas perfume remains on the skin. Both are built on invisible, airborne chemistry that the brain reads as feeling. A perfect truffle is an emulsion, balancing fat, water, and cocoa solids. A truffle seems simple, but it is a careful balance. At its heart is a mixture of chocolate and cream, and those ingredients do not naturally want to stay smooth together. Chocolate brings fat and solids. Cream brings water, fat, and proteins. When the emulsion is right, the filling feels silky and stable, and it melts into a slow, rich wave. When it breaks, it can look oily or grainy, and the mouthfeel turns muddy. Temperature matters from the first moment. The cream may separate fats or scorch flavors if it is overheated. The chocolate might not melt evenly if it is too cold. Stirring technique matters too. You want to build a glossy center from the inside outward, not whip in air. Then, because the structure keeps solidifying as it cools, resting is important. A great truffle is not just a sweet. It is a controlled meeting of liquids that should not easily agree. Every chocolate bar is a small record of biology, weather, and human craft. A bar can feel like a finished object, but it is more like a timeline you can taste. Biology writes the first chapter in the trees, genetics, and the pod's chemistry. Weather edits the story through rain, heat, and harvest timing. Then, individuals take control by making decisions that either increase or decrease the number of options. How carefully was the fruit opened? How cleanly did the fermentation move? To what extent did the beans dry uniformly? How patiently were they roasted, refined, and rested? Each step leaves fingerprints, and some fingerprints are loud. Someone you will never meet made decisions weeks or months ago that can make a bar taste bright, deep, or delicate. That is what makes chocolate worth attention. It is not only a flavor, it is a result. It carries a chain of living processes that had to align from tiny flowers to careful packaging. When you snap a piece, you are hearing the end of a long story. Hi there. Let the world of chocolate gradually fade into the background as we near the end of our journey. We wandered from meticulous roasting rooms to shiny finished bars, and from humid tropical groves to warm fermentation heaps tonight. We traced how a fruit becomes a flavor, how microbes and heat reshape seeds into something fragrant, and how tiny choices decide snap, shine, and melt. We listened for the subtle science that lies behind aroma, sweetness, and that comforting familiarity that seems to arrive before the first bite. And we noticed how chocolate is never just one thing. It is agriculture and chemistry. It is history and craft. It is a chain of human hands and living systems folded into something small enough to rest on your tongue. If you enjoyed drifting through this story, you might like to leave a kind thought, or tap like and subscribe so these sleepy science journeys can reach more ears. And if you happen to still be awake, there is another video waiting on your screen now. You can let it carry you onward, one curious step at a time. However, you don't need to keep any information for the time being. Let the ideas dissolve, the way chocolate softens with warmth. Let your jaw relax. Allow your shoulders to relax. Feel your breathing ease into a steady rhythm that is easy and unhurried, in and out. Sleep well and good night.